Hello, everyone. Since we are not together in class, you get to take notes from this recording. And then we can also talk about it when we're together in class on Zoom. So I want to tell you about a very special kind of cell division called meiosis. And this only occurs in one type of cell, the sex cells. So let's get started. You should have downloaded a document where you can write your notes. And there's one or maybe two words missing in every sentence. And you have to get those words from the slides. And to make it easy for you, I have put the missing words in capital letters. So as you're scanning the slide, you can very quickly see which word you need to write into your notes. All right, so have your notes next to you. You can pause this video if you need to. You can go back and re-listen to sections of it if you need to. Take your time and make sure that you understand this special kind of cell division called meiosis. And just looking at this picture, you can see it's a little different. The cell actually divides 2 times. And if you look at the first cell at the beginning, and then the cells that are at the end, they look quite different. So we're going to talk about how they're different and how they get that way. All right, let's get started. So first of all, meiosis only occurs in cells called gametes, or they're sometimes called sex cells. Both terms are fine, but you should know both of those. So these cells are different from all other cells because they only have 1 copy of each chromosome instead of 2 copies. And so we call them haploid cells. And that's very different from all the other cells in your body, which are called body cells or somatic cells. And you need to know both of those terms as well. Those cells have the full number of chromosomes, so they're called diploid. So for instance, in humans, we have 46 chromosomes in our somatic cells, but our gametes only have 23 chromosomes. And if you think about it, that makes sense because an egg has 23 chromosomes, a sperm has 23 chromosomes, and when they come together in fertilization, how many chromosomes will the fertilized egg have? It's also called a zygote. It's got 46, the correct diploid number. So it does make sense that all gametes have to be haploid. So it's not just that. Meiosis makes cells that have half the DNA. And it's also a unique combination of DNA because you want lots of genetic variation in the offspring. And so there's a way that meiosis mixes up the DNA, and we'll talk about that later. This is very different than mitosis. If you think back to our study of mitosis, the goal of mitosis is to make 2 cells that look exactly like the original cell. That's not meiosis. Meiosis, it cuts the DNA in half and also mixes up the DNA, so it's a unique combination. And so when fertilization occurs, like I said earlier, the offspring will have the diploid number of chromosomes and a unique combination of DNA, so lots of genetic variation. So we're going to go through how meiosis works. And I'm not going to pause here and talk about this picture, but we'll talk about it later. So meiosis, the cells divide 2 times, and they make 4 cells at the end. So you can see that in this picture, starting with 1 cell, and these are just special cells in your body, or any organism that does sexual reproduction will have these special cells that go through meiosis. All other cells in the body go through mitosis. So we're going to follow this process. How does the cell divide? Once, so you can see it here, it's divided once, and then it divides again. So let's walk through this. So before meiosis begins, the DNA is copied. And just like in mitosis, it's copied during interphase. And then the DNA condenses into chromosomes. Remember, this is like moving day. You don't live your life with all your stuff packed into moving boxes. That's too inconvenient. You can't find your stuff when you need it. Same thing with the cell. The only time the cell condenses the DNA into chromosomes is on moving day or division day. And so the DNA gets packed tightly around these histone proteins and then coiled together into chromosomes so it can safely move the DNA without breaking it or losing pieces. So homologous chromosomes line up. So the two number ones line up, the two number twos line up. We talked about homologous chromosomes earlier. Notice these are different colors. So let's say the green one came from dad and the pink one came from mom. We'll be stereotypical with the colors. So normally there's one copy of the one that dad gave you, and there's one copy of the one that mom gave you. But remember, the DNA copies itself. So the copy is now attached to each other at the centromere. So this is a chromosome made up of two sister chromatids. And so this green one is an exact copy of this green one. And over here, this pink one made a copy of itself, and here's its copy attached to each other at the centromere. So there's something very special that happens in meiosis. And that's where these homologous chromosomes, they've lined up next to each other and they trade similar segments of DNA. This is called crossing over. It's a way of shuffling the DNA so the offspring get a unique combination. So you can see a picture here. So a blue one from dad, and it's already copied itself because here's its copy attached. The red one from mom, sorry, the colors changed in those pictures. And here's the copy of mom's chromosome. And they line up next to each other, and see how we actually call it crossing over because they do kind of cross over each other, and then they swap segments. So now this one from dad has a little part that came from mom originally, way back when that individual was formed from an egg and a sperm. It got one of these homologous chromosomes from the egg and one from the sperm. And now it's this mix of the two. And because of this, humans, for example, but this could be true for any organism, can make trillions of different combinations of DNA. So the chances of two sperm having the same exact mix of DNA is very slim. Yes, it's possible, but very slim. Or two eggs, same thing. Very slim chance that two eggs will have the exact same combination of DNA, even though they come from the same female. So the next part that happens, this is a little different from mitosis, the homologous chromosomes separate. And one of the pair goes to each side of the cell. So the DNA is separating, but they're still as double-stranded chromosomes. And then the cell divides. We call the division of the nucleus is meiosis in this case, and then the division of the rest of the cell is called cytokinesis. So now at that point, there's two cells, but they're still diploid. They haven't cut the amount of DNA in half yet. So that's why they go through this process again. So these two cells divide again. And let's take a look at this picture. So here's the cell division. Notice that crossing over has already occurred because these chromosomes are a mix of colors, you can see. And the chromosomes line up, And now the chromosomes, double-stranded chromosomes, separate. And one chromatid goes to each side in this cell, and same with this one. A chromatid to each side. And then the cell divides. So let's put that down on paper. So this time the chromosomes separate and one chromatid moves to each side of the cell. And then cytokinesis again. So the nucleus has divided in meiosis, but the rest of the cell still has to divide. So that's cytokinesis. And in the end, you end up with 4 cells. So from 1, you end up with 4. And notice in this picture, each of these cells has a slightly different mix of the DNA. And in this picture, it's red and it's white. So we're going to watch this. Actually, I want you to watch this on your own. Here's the link. It's also in your notes. And as you're taking notes, I want you to just take notes on the video as you're watching it. So now let's take a look at meiosis in males, and then we'll look at females because they're slightly different. We're going to look at males first because it's more straightforward in males. So meiosis occurs in the testes, and there are these special cells in the testes called spermatocytes. So here's a microscopic picture of some of those spermatocytes. And a man starts going through meiosis when he hits puberty, so probably around 14 years old or so. That can vary. And for the rest of his life, he will continue going through meiosis. Each time he goes through meiosis, he produces 4 sperm. And it is the male who determines the sex of the baby. And we'll talk more about this in class. But the sperm either carries an X chromosome, like this, or it carries a Y chromosome, because the male sex chromosomes are X and Y. So half of the sperm he makes has an X chromosome, half has a Y. Females, their sex chromosomes are X and X. So all of the eggs are going to contain one X chromosome. So it is the male that determines the sex of the baby. Now, females, it's quite different. The general process is the same, but how it happens throughout her life is quite different. So let's step through how females go through meiosis. So meiosis occurs in the ovaries, and there are cells called the oocytes. So this right here is an ovary, and then this is the fallopian tube. And so the eggs ovulate into the fallopian tube, and then they travel down the fallopian tube and into the uterus, which is right here. This is not human, by the way. This one is a rat ovary. And actually, no, I'm sorry. This is a cat ovary. Here's a microscopic picture. And this right here is where one of the cells are going through meiosis. So you can see this is the cell, the oocyte, that's going through meiosis, and it's in a follicle full of fluid. And notice there's other follicles because every month, multiple oocytes start going through meiosis. The first one to finish the process ovulates, and then the rest die. And then the next month it happens again. A bunch of cells, probably on average about 10 in each ovary, start going through meiosis. The first one to finish ovulates, the rest die. And not only that, that's different for males, but also when she goes through meiosis, you can see it here, notice it's not an equal division. The one cell is really large. It gets all the cytoplasm during cytokinesis. This one over here only gets the chromosomes and very little else. And when it goes through division again, once again, uneven division of the cytoplasm. So one cell gets all of the organelles and the liquid inside the cell, and the other one pretty much just gets the chromosomes. These small ones are called polar bodies. And some people ask, well, could a polar body get fertilized? Maybe, but if it did, it doesn't have all the organelles that it needs to survive. It's not big enough to survive. So if it got fertilized, it would never produce an offspring. But this large egg that does produce the offspring if it gets fertilized. So it's got all of the cytoplasm, all the organelles, and then it ends up with one copy of each of the chromosomes. And why does an egg need to be so big, you might wonder? Some people think, oh, it's so the sperm can fit inside. Well, yes, the sperm will, whichever sperm fertilizes the egg, will release its chromosomes. So now the cell will have two copies of every chromosome. But that egg has to survive. Let me go back to this picture. The egg ovulates from the ovary and goes into the fallopian tube. It takes about 7 days to work its way down the fallopian tube until it finally implants in the uterus. So that egg needs everything it needs to survive for those 7 days. So that's why an egg is so large, because yes, it's internal in some animals, like mammals, but it's not getting any nutrients from the mother until it implants in the uterus. Now, here's something else that's different about females, different from males. A female baby, when she's born, she has all the eggs she's ever going to make. They're already in her ovaries, and they have completed the first division of meiosis before she was born. Very different from males. Males don't even start the process until they hit puberty, and then they're making thousands and thousands of sperm every day. Not females. They go through meiosis 1 before they're born. And then once she starts puberty and she starts menstruating, that's when there's this race I mentioned before. So it's probably about 20 on average. Oocytes are all racing to complete meiosis 2, the second division of meiosis. And whichever one finishes the process first ovulates, the rest die, like I said. And to make that process happen, there's actually 4 different hormones involved. This graph just has 2. She ends up having major changes in hormones every month to get those eggs to mature and then ovulate. And then the whole process starts again about 28 days later. So this is what I've already told you, but put it down on your paper. The first ovum to complete meiosis 2 ovulates, and the rest die. Now, what happens eventually, because remember, she's born with all the eggs she's ever going to produce, and eventually she runs out of eggs. So that's a process called menopause, when she stops going through meiosis 2 each month. So she's born with lots and lots of eggs. So notice a fetus has a lot of eggs. By the time the baby's born, it's around 1 million eggs. And she's lost a lot before she even starts puberty. And then every month she's losing a lot of eggs, because she ovulates 1 and the others that started meiosis 2 die. So, and plus others are just dying along the way. So by the time she hits 35, there is a very sharp decline in her fertility. That means the chances that she can get pregnant. And this is something that you should know, because I've had friends who said, oh my gosh, nobody ever told me. They they thought, they wanted to go to college, they wanted to start a career, they wanted to travel, and they didn't even think about having kids until they were in their late 30s. And at that point, it was really hard for them to have children because they had lost so many eggs. And the eggs that they had left were how old? As old as they are. So they're not the best quality of eggs anymore. So just something to keep in mind. Not that I'm saying have babies quickly, but just keep in mind that if you wait until after 35, your chance of having children is much lower. All right. You'll notice on, on your notes on the left-hand side, it says quiz questions. So I want you to do something with these notes. I want you to look at the notes, and I want you to write what you think would be good quiz questions, not multiple choice, but free response quiz questions, and write those in the left-hand margin. So go through the notes from the very beginning, and what do you think would be a good quiz question for each of the pieces of information on these notes? And then when you go to study, you can use those quiz questions, or you can hand your paper to somebody in your family or a friend, and you can have them use those quiz questions to test you. Or you can self-quiz. So you fold your paper in half so you can only see the quiz questions. That's not quite in half, but so you can only see the column with the quiz questions, and you ask yourself the quiz questions. And if you can't answer it, you can look at your notes. The other thing I want you to do is on the bottom of each page, I want you to make a summary. I want you to summarize the information on each page of the notes. Making a summary is a really good study technique, and so is writing quiz questions. There's one part of the notes that we're going to go over in class, and those are the circles about the man and how men go through meiosis and females go through meiosis. So we will do that in class. You're going to fill in those circles with some numbers. All right, I will see you back in class.